Hello, YouTube and Dr. Rome. Welcome to my review of Larry Spears' Focus on Leadership, chapters 16 and 17. Chapter 16, Servant Leadership in Philanthropic Institutions, is actually written by Larry Spears and John Burkhart. Larry Spears himself. John Burkhart, I have a picture of him. He works at the University of Michigan, and he helps with leadership and higher education. As far as I know, he's still working there. Um, he's the founding director of the National Forum of Higher Education for Public Good. And so he's at the University of Michigan, so well experienced in leadership and such. And then we have Larry Spears, we all know and love. And he is the CEO of the Greenleaf Center for Servant Leadership, and still doing that since 1990. Good guy. But yeah, we'll dive right into the things that stuck out to me in this section. A few different quotes. So the first one on page 229, it says, talking about listening, grant that I may not seek first to be understood, but to understand. And I think that's just a really good quote that it stuck out to me, just something to keep in mind of when I'm leading people. Am I one that wants to be the loudest person in the room, the one that wants to be noticed and everyone to understand where I'm coming from, this and that? Or am I one that's going to be one that who will listen to what people have to say and who listen and pay attention to the needs of the people? And without listening, it's impossible to know what is happening in your community. The next one I had, talking about healing, on page 232, quote says, but Werr says, Ivan argues in The Medical Nemesis, the healer can be the most serious threat to health by fostering a relationship of false dependence or by contributing to an industry of despair. And I thought that was pretty cool, just talking about, it's important to have healing and bringing healing in philanthropic situations, but also it can be the biggest threat because you find people relying on these healers, and the healer doesn't necessarily provide a solution to the bigger problem, maybe just a short-term solution. And so it's something to keep in mind, that we can't go and help a small situation or a large situation with small problems. You can't put a band-aid on a broken leg. It's bigger than that, and it's important to keep in mind what we're doing in every philanthropic situation. It's a hard word, philanthropic. Philanthropy. So my next quote, 239, talking about commitment to the growth of people. And it said, the most troubling question, how do we measure the impact of what we do? Just simply put, how do we measure? Is what we're doing even bringing value to society? And I think in servant leadership, it's the most difficult to measure. How can you say that one person is a better servant than the other? Is the results in their numbers, or like how many people would come up and if you ask them, oh, is this person a servant? Tallying who says that more often. It's a good question to ask, and trying to just figure out like what impact are we leaving behind? How do we measure that compared to somebody that's not being a servant leader? Is it really beneficial? And so I think just trying to consider ways of measuring it. I think the most accurate would probably just be comparing it to businesses that openly don't call themselves servant leaders and that just stick to a simple business plan, comparing to the same companies seeing different results. And even that is hard to completely make perfect. But yeah, I just thought that was pretty interesting. Overall, a cool chapter. This next one, chapter 17, Foresight, the lead that the leader has, written by David S. Young, who I have a picture of him right here. He's a pastor and professor. He, as far as I know, it's really hard to find a picture of him. I can only find one on the back of his book. But he, he's a church renewal servant, professor, friend. He served in many congregations, and he kind of specializes in congregation transformation. So just working with churches to build the body up and get a solid foundation. So we'll jump right into chapter 17. The first quote. First quote I got. Oh, yeah. So, on page 247, foresight is what he calls a better than average guess about what is going to happen when in the future. Failure of foresight is to act at that moment when you still have the freedom. Or failure to act at that moment when you still have the freedom to act is unethical because you fail to act responsibly when the moment of opportunity is available. Leading is critical here. And he's just, this whole chapter is talking about foresight, but just kind of simply describing it as it's almost a guess, but it's an educated guess. You're using things, he says in the previous page, you take what's happened in the past and you can see what will probably happen in the future. So just using context, being educated in every decision, and he's just saying failure to act in the moment when you know what you need to do is just a complete failure completely. And so, it's critical to be aware of your leadership and what's going on in any situation, like relating to foresight. The next quote I got, page 249, I really liked how he kind of gave us an insight on his life. And he says, I engage in a weekly 2-hour retreat. I go to a retreat center and do 4 simple things. First, I sit quietly and give everything to God. All feelings, emotions, situations, concerns. I release the press of the urgent and begin to sense the presence of God. Second, I read a portion of Scripture. Meditate on it. Think about the themes and the inner dynamics of life as it should be lived. He writes in his prayer journal. Thirdly, I pick out some readings from a devotional and meditate upon it. And then fourth, he tries to be totally still and just feel the love of God. I thought it was a really good description and recommendation or just a description and example of getting alone with the Lord. And also, we talk a lot about with servant leadership of spending time alone to recuperate and just gather thoughts, gather new ideas. And so I just thought it was a great example of doing this while involving God and bringing him into the picture, because the Lord knows all things and the best thing for every situation. So I just really liked how he showed us that example, and I'll probably try doing something like that. I'm trying to make a schedule, an hour or 2 hours a week or something like that. It's very doable. The last quote I have on page 253, he says, I tell church leaders that unless we begin, nothing happens. So he's talking about how in churches that he's helping, he gives them vision plans and stuff, and sometimes they're reluctant to do it. But he's saying, look, if you want to stay the same, do nothing at all. And I think that applies for everything in life. It's important to constantly be considering what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Are we just sitting around being lazy, or are we furthering our education? Are we actually utilizing the resources we have? No business will ever be successful from just sitting around and doing nothing. And there's even proverbs that talk about it, talking about the folding of the hands is just foolish, and just sitting around. I wish I had the exact proverb now, but I'll probably look for it later in class. But yeah, so that was kind of the premise of those chapters. I really enjoyed them. And I'll see you in the next video. Bye.